Welcome to Tales of the Night, the place where shadows come to life, showing their true form, where fear and all the beings that feed on it slide between words. In this episode, you'll hear stories that perhaps others have kept silent. Tales of inexplicable encounters, events that defy logic, and presences that shouldn't be there, but somehow are, very, very close to us. Listen, keep the lights low, and open your mind to the unknown. Because as we always say, in every corner, there's something waiting to make you the next protagonist of Tales of the Night. We delve into this episode starting with Carlos's experience, who had an unexpected encounter while returning from a trip. What seemed like just another night in a quiet but lonely private neighborhood transformed into one of the most terrifying experiences of his life. So, welcome to Tales of the Night. Hello, Uriel. Good evening. My name is Carlos. Thank you in advance for your attention. I've only been curious about these topics for a year and a half, and your podcast is one of the first I started listening to. I like the format and would like to participate with this brief story. During my university years, I rented a very comfortable small house in a private neighborhood in the state of Mexico for approximately a year and a half. Of the few houses there, mine was the only one that had stained glass in the main door, so you could see from outside if the hallway light was on. I remember there were a few empty houses in the neighborhood, either under construction or uninhabited, and the area felt somewhat unsafe, to be honest. I also remember we had a few security guards, but they always quit or simply stopped showing up until we were left without a guard for a few days. It was then that we decided to take measures to prevent anyone from breaking in while we found a replacement. The first agreement was to change the padlock on the main door to install a more reliable lock, and the second was to place barbed wire around the perimeter wall of the neighborhood. Around that time, I was doing my school internship, which required me to take a one-day trip. But my colleagues convinced me to stay one more day to finish the internship. I arrived at the neighborhood entrance in the early morning of the third day. I took out my keys to open the padlock and saw the new lock in place. I had forgotten to ask for the key to the new lock. It was around 2 a.m. and my cell phone was completely dead. I only had my hoodie and a change of dirty clothes in my backpack. The situation seemed pretty bad for me, and I didn't want to stay outside on the street at that hour. I thought about jumping over the neighborhood wall, but there were neighbors who lived behind my house. I didn't want them to see me. And then I remembered there was an empty house inside the neighborhood where I might be able to jump without alerting anyone. I went around the street outside until I reached behind the house. There I found an empty lot at the same height. In my desperation, I ran in without thinking, crossing through the debris and weeds to reach the wall that connected with the neighborhood. I made sure no one had seen or heard me, as I arrived quite agitated and nervous. Once I was calmer, I started planning how to climb up and jump to the other side. That's when I saw the barbed wire on the wall. That damn wire I had forgotten about. I was in the darkness of the empty lot. I had a moment of discouragement, and fear started to betray me. I thought it would be better to return to the street and spend the night wherever I could, but I saw a very large wooden beam and was able to use it to climb the wall. I also used a dirty shirt I had in my backpack to cover the barbed wire. Although I scratched my arm a bit, I finally landed on my feet on the other side, unable to suppress a groan that I had to silence immediately because I saw a light inside the house from the backyard. I would have sworn the house was empty, as I passed by it almost daily and never saw any movement or lights. But this light was very strange, glowing faintly with a yellowish, almost green color, and flickering like a candle flame. I let myself be carried away by intrigue and curiosity, trusting in the shelter that night gave me. But I heard behind me a trembling voice that asked, "Did you hurt yourself?" A spasm ran through my entire body and made me turn without disguise. I barely distinguished a figure in a light nightgown, sitting in a chair next to a tall bush. I would swear there was no one else in the yard. There was silence until she got up from the chair calmly and walked towards the interior of that house. Then I saw the hunched figure of a very, very old woman. I remained quiet and looked around, searching for the exit, as I was just a few houses away from mine. Nothing more, but something caught my attention. In the darkness of the yard, I could barely notice that the bush next to the chair where the old woman had been sitting was swaying, but the wind wasn't blowing at that moment. Everything else was motionless, silent, until the old woman came out again and approached me, saying, "I don't want to be alone with him anymore." This last phrase confirmed a bad feeling. I looked toward the end of the hallway that led to the neighborhood's main street and saw that the gate was closed, and she asked, "You came to keep me company, right?" And she smiled at me, showing dark gums, and then let out a small girlish laugh that seemed like two. At that moment, I ran decidedly toward the end of the hallway. I jumped the gate and continued through the streets of the median where I finally stopped. I didn't know what to think, and my heart was beating strongly. In a moment, I was already outside, on the neighborhood's main street, and I could no longer see that house I had escaped from because of the trees on the median. I ran again. I could barely see the other side of the street, below the foliage, at trunk level. I continued walking fearfully until I heard a small laugh. When I turned, I saw feet moving a few meters behind the trees, and I ran again. Just before reaching my house's door, I heard a cackle behind me, and it was the old woman running. I saw her face almost deformed by laughter, and 2 or 3 gray locks shaking in the air. I saw that her legs took short steps, but they moved horrifyingly fast under that nightgown. I barely managed to open the door with the key to enter backward and close it again, but I broke one of the door's stained glass panels, and she stuck her arm in, searching for me violently until she gave up and left. My jaw was trembling from the horror and shock of what was happening. I kept hearing her laughter outside the house because I saw the pieces of glass on the floor, but I didn't see any traces of blood. I approached the window fearfully and saw how the lights of other houses were turning on. The neighbors came out to see what was happening, and then I was able to calm down. I sat in the living room chair and closed my eyes until I fell asleep. During the day, a neighbor with another neighbor woke me up by knocking on the door because they wanted to know if I was okay, and also talk a bit about what happened. I confessed to them that I had to jump over the neighborhood wall, which displeased them quite a bit, and reluctantly they told me about Doña Elvia, who had been left alone because her daughter and husband died from a very rare disease. They didn't tell me more. Everyone had been very prudent in not talking about her during the 1.5 years that I lived in that small neighborhood. I suppose they had been helping Doña Elvia as they understood her situation. But why did they do it in secret? I also asked them if they were sure she was alone that night, but I didn't want to give more details about it either. They just advised me to have the same prudence as them, for the good of the neighborhood. They themselves, at their discretion, took care of Doña Elvia, giving her the necessary attention. I was able to finish my internship and left there a few days after the incident. The truth is, I don't like to remember this story because it leaves me with a very strange feeling, and still sometimes causes me nightmares because deep down, community, I believe Doña Elvia wasn't alone in her house. Tales of the Night community. I want to thank you for joining us once again. If there's something I've learned over time, it's that each story tells something unique, and no one better than you to share those secrets that you don't dare tell anyone else. So if you've experienced something inexplicable or terrifying, don't hesitate to write to us. Stories like the previous one, even probably not paranormal, are quite terrifying experiences. We're always open to hearing the voices of those who still have something to tell. Subscribe to this program and be part of this community, this family, where every night we face the unknown and whatever comes together. Tales of the Night is here to listen and share. We continue. Hello, community. Hello, Uriel. Nice to meet you. After having listened to many stories, anecdotes, and tales, I've finally taken the time to write about an experience I had years ago. For various reasons, I tried to forget it, but what happened to me a few days ago made all those forgotten memories come back to me. That feeling of fear and anguish that I thought I had left behind has resurfaced after so long. For some of you, these stories might not generate fear or uncertainty, but for me who lived them, just remembering those moments makes my skin crawl. I prefer to omit my name since it's not very common and it could be easy to locate me. Besides, I don't think it's relevant to this story. In my family, we were always taught to respect what is good, but just as there is positive good, we also know there is a dark side that to some extent maintains a balance in things. My story centers on a moment in my life when I was 17 years old. Now I'm 29, and although 12 years have passed, I'm still dealing with the aftermath of that experience. As I mentioned, good and evil exist. I understood this in my adolescence when I fell hopelessly in love with a girl named Diana. Some will say there's nothing strange about this. We've all been hopelessly in love with someone who isn't good for us at some point in our lives, especially in youth. And before continuing, let me talk a bit about her and her family. She was a cheerful and friendly girl, with fair skin, curly hair, sweet voice, large expressive eyes. She was thin, but already had a woman's body. Her mother and grandmother came from a country where not everyone has good opportunities. Unfortunately, many people must emigrate to seek a better life. In their home, only the three of them lived. On one occasion, when we were starting to get to know each other, Diana asked me to meet her family. As I wanted to make a good impression and show that my intentions were sincere, I accepted. I had already introduced Diana to my grandmother, who during the meeting didn't say anything. However, when Diana went home, my grandmother told me that she felt something wasn't right with that girl, and that I shouldn't accept anything from her or her family. Not food, not water, not bracelets, not chains, nothing. It's important to mention that my grandmother comes from Guerrero, from a village where people have knowledge of certain practices, and this includes my grandfather, who was a witch doctor. Well, although I never met him, given my grandmother's experience, I decided to listen to her. The day I visited the apartment where Diana lived, I was surprised by how normal the place was. What caught my attention the most was that her mother and grandmother looked much younger than they really were. Diana told me it was thanks to some creams and a homemade tea that her grandmother prepared, and that if I wanted, she could offer me some. But remembering my grandmother's warning, I refused, saying I was allergic to guava and other things, that I could get sick if I ate something strange. She accepted and didn't insist anymore. The meeting with her family went wonderfully, and at the end, I took the opportunity to ask her mother's permission to date her daughter as boyfriend and girlfriend. She accepted, but with certain recommendations. Although I don't remember them all, what stayed very clearly in my mind was the following. Don't have relations if you're not sure, and don't hurt my daughter, because remember that everything sooner or later comes back. The last warning at the time seemed more like a threat. However, at that moment, all excited about the relationship, I committed to doing everything possible to make Diana happy and ensure she wouldn't lack anything. Thus passed days, weeks, or even months, where everything was love. We celebrated our month-iversaries, and Diana always had special gestures for me. I remember that in the first 3 months, I accepted the things she gave me, but never kept them, following my grandmother's warning. On one of those occasions, we attended a party where Diana gave me a chain with half a heart. Pretty cheesy, I know, and she insisted that I put it on. I accepted and let her put it on me. From that moment on, I started to feel like my love for her grew every day. I accepted details like cookies, chocolates, and cakes. I didn't think anything would happen from eating and drinking those things, and my love for her intensified. I couldn't stop thinking about her, dreaming about her, wanting to be by her side. She was my world. My love for Diana was so deep that I barely ate anything that wasn't prepared by her. And so a year passed in the blink of an eye, and the end-of-year festivities arrived, moments when we gather as a family to be thankful for another year. In my family, it's a tradition to get together to celebrate. It was at that moment when my grandmother finally met Diana's mother and grandmother. I clearly remember the expression of both when they shook hands. It was extreme seriousness, difficult to describe. Once introduced, Diana's mother called her, and they went to the kitchen to talk. It seemed that what they were discussing was very serious. The only thing I heard from Diana was, "I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know." She said it over and over. Meanwhile, dinner was served, and everyone moved to the patio, where my family began to get to know Diana and her mother. That night, everything went very quietly. The party came to an end, and most people started going home. We were about to do the same, but my grandmother asked to speak to me alone. She asked me how I had been feeling, if I was eating well, how school was going, work, those things. To all the questions, I answered that I felt good, that everything was going wonderfully. And then she gave me a medal and asked me to pray Psalm 91 every night. To reassure her, I promised I would, although I had never read or heard it in my life. And a year and some months passed. Then, Diana and I began to be intimate. On one occasion, after having relations, Diana proposed making a pact. We will always return to each other, no matter where we are or how much time passes. I accepted, but told her it wasn't necessary to make a pact. It was something I could swear to, but for her, it wasn't enough. So I decided to fulfill her wish. She took out some things from a black bag and asked me to give her certain elements. Some hair, a complete nail, which she pulled out with pliers, and a little blood. Since I was studying to be a lab technician, I drew some without problem. She did the same. Everything we collected, she emptied into 2 empty glasses. Inside, I was laughing, trying not to disturb the serious atmosphere. Then she took out a thermos with something she had already prepared. I never knew what it was, and she poured it into the glasses, mixing the nails, hair, and blood. In a very serious voice, she told me that now we had to drink from those glasses. I looked at her fixedly with the same face that you surely just made, and asked if she was serious. She confirmed that she was, and thinking it was a joke, I approached the glass ready to drink it, but she encouraged me to do it. To clarify, I drank the glass that contained her nail, her blood, and her hair. After that, I don't know if I was drugged or what, but my senses seemed to be enhanced 200%. That night we fell asleep, and the next day we returned to our homes. From then on, we began to experience strange things. Although I remained deeply in love and obsessed, I continued eating and drinking everything she offered me. Months later, we attended a party at my paternal grandparents' house. At that event, Diana received a call, and when she answered her phone, I discovered she was cheating on me with someone from where she lived. We had a terrible argument. I remember we took her home, and when she was about to enter, she said to me, "Remember that you and I will always be together, no matter what happens." At that moment, her eyes were light brown. I don't know how to explain it, but from that instant, my physical and mental health began to deteriorate. Each day I felt more tired and stressed. I started declining in school and at work. It was 2 very difficult weeks until Diana's mother called me and said she wanted to talk to me to find out what had happened, to see if there was any solution. The meeting was at her house, where they offered me tea, which I accepted while we talked. Despite my anger, I decided there was no possible solution. A phrase from Diana's mother left me very unsettled at that moment. "You promised something and you have to fulfill it." However, my anger prevented me from taking her words seriously, so I simply left. From there, community, things became even stranger. Several days passed during which I drank uncontrollably, and this situation began to worry me more and more. The first day, I was in my living room listening to an Arctic Monkeys song that I really like. The lights were off, and the house was only illuminated by the stereo lights, which simulated a small disco. I remember looking at the floor crying when, for some reason, I felt a gaze upon me. I quickly raised my head and began searching through the darkness, thinking that perhaps a family member had arrived. What I saw, community, was a tall silhouette over 2 meters tall in the kitchen, watching me. I rubbed my eyes to clear my vision, and when I looked again, I couldn't see anything. I thought it was my imagination or the effect of alcohol, so I simply repeated the song. And when I turned toward the stairs leading to the 2nd floor of the house, I realized that something was indeed with me. I want to remind you that I was sitting in the living room, and the stairs were directly in front of me. What I saw has no logical explanation, It was an unsettling male figure, completely devoid of hair, that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its eyes, black as night, lacked any reflection, which gave it a completely supernatural air. The white skin, like milk, dramatically contrasted with its teeth, long, sharp, and yellowish, as if they had been worn down by time. The creature was gripping the railings tightly, its long, bony fingers closed around them with disturbing delicacy, while its razor-sharp nails seemed ready to tear them apart. Its complexion was extremely thin, which gave it an even more ghostly appearance. That thing was laughing at me, with a laugh that still echoes in my head. I tried to control myself, not to scream, but it was inevitable. I was immobile, as if I had sleep paralysis. Although I knew I wasn't asleep, I couldn't breathe. The air felt stale, and an enormous pressure was crushing my entire body. I began to sweat excessively. I couldn't look away from that thing, not even close my eyes. Suddenly, its long index finger pointed at me, and in a barely perceptible voice I heard, "You promised something that must be fulfilled." I felt something flowing from my eyes. I had my hands on my face, but I reacted. I could move again. The first thing I did was get up from the couch, turn on all the lights in the house, and go out to the patio to wait for my family. I don't know at what moment that thing disappeared. Days passed, and I continued feeling bad about everything I had experienced. I began having lucid dreams in which Diana asked me to go see her. She told me she needed me and wanted to be with me. However, I refused to go look for her or send her a message. I didn't want to have any type of communication with her. The next incident occurred 2 days later, on a Saturday. I was returning from my social service at the Emiliano Zapata High Specialty Hospital in the state of Morelos. I was very tired and told my family that I would go to bed early because I had to leave again the next day. I just had dinner, showered, and went to bed. I remember receiving a message from Diana. I didn't open it. 3 to 4 more messages arrived, and the last one said, "If you don't want to answer me, face the consequences." I didn't pay attention to them. I was too tired, and the last thing I wanted was to fight or talk with someone, much less with her. It had been a very difficult day. I lay down in bed on my left side, facing the wall, as I had always done. I don't know. Community. If what happened next was real or was a dream. The house was in complete silence, as if everyone had gone. I heard how the door to my room opened slowly and heard my sister's voice asking me if I was asleep. I replied that I wasn't, but to leave me alone. At that moment, I was crying again. I heard clumsy footsteps walking in the darkness and felt someone sitting beside me on the bed. It creaked very strangely as the person seemed to be quite heavy. I felt a hand caressing my back and heard a voice saying, "Everything will be fixed if you go to see her." At that moment, the voice was no longer my sister's. It was a completely different voice. I felt how those long, thin fingers caressed my head, how they played with my hair. I turned slowly and could see a tall silhouette, probably over 2 meters tall, sitting next to my bed. I immediately knew who or what that was. I tried to get up, but I couldn't move. I began to feel that I couldn't breathe. I couldn't close my eyes. I just repeated in my mind, "It can't be. It can't be. This isn't happening. This isn't happening." Over and over again. I tried to remember some prayer, a chant, a church prayer, and for some reason I remembered Psalm 91, and in my mind I recited, "Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust." At that instant, the creature began to laugh. I stopped feeling the pressure on the bed and on my body. I started breathing normally. I decided that the next day I would go see Diana to try to fix things. I arrived early. I knocked on the door and she opened it. Her eyes were swollen, gray eyes, and she looked thin. We started talking and she told me she hadn't been able to eat well during all those days. That she felt quite bad about the harm she had done to me, but that she really wanted to be with me. She offered me tea and cookies, which I accepted. We ate, talked, and fortunately solved everything. From that moment on, I stopped having those nocturnal visits from the tall creature that bothered me. I began to focus on my physical and mental well-being. I wanted to be the best version of myself. For her. I wanted her to be proud of the man she was going to be with. Thus, it was a year and 11 months where everything was love, or so I thought. However, on one occasion I met someone who really attracted me physically. I invited her out for a drink, and she accepted. We met in a private place where no one could know we were there. But a few days passed, and Diana found out. Right at our 2-year reconciliation anniversary, she decided to end things with me. She said she knew what I had done, and that she couldn't forgive me, although she would continue to take care of me. I begged for her forgiveness, but she wouldn't agree. That day, community. Her eyes were completely black. I looked for her many times, trying to get her back, but she never accepted. And after a couple of months, something very strange happened to me. I received a package of cookies that she had sent me, but my sister started eating them. I wasn't there at the moment. My older sister, upon biting into one, felt something hard and spit it out. What she saw was terrifying. The cookie had nails and hair. My sisters broke other cookies and confirmed they all had the same. They admitted they shouldn't eat anything that was sent to me anymore. Days passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about her. Her hair, her smell, her eyes, her breathing, everything. I would leave the house at late hours of the morning to go see her, standing outside her window. I was like this for several days until my parents intervened, especially my father. He told me he had gone through something similar, without going into details, and took me to see one of his friends, who told me they had done very strong work on me, and that due to the time that had passed, it would be complicated but not impossible to resolve. This man gave me a bitter tea that made me vomit a black substance. I thought it was digested blood. He gave clear instructions to my father about what needed to be done, what I should take. I remember it was a difficult time. I lost a lot of weight because I didn't want to eat anything that wasn't made by Diana. I ended up in the hospital for dehydration on 2 occasions. One day I decided to do everything possible to get better. I prayed every day, drank the tea, and ate the plants that my father's friend recommended. The last strange thing that happened was 7 months after all this. I still remember Diana and missed her. I heard rumors that she had come looking for me, but my family stopped her, that they had even told her I had gone far away from there, so she would leave me in peace. The last strangeness occurred when I was dating someone named Elizabeth, who is now my wife. That night we were going to my parents' house for dinner. To get there, we had to cross a bridge that is next to a ravine, known by children as the Toad Bridge. And indeed, there are many frogs and toads there. While we were walking, I felt a gaze. The atmosphere became tense. Elizabeth looked at me and told me I was pale. She asked me what was wrong. I stood still, and when I raised my head, I saw something terrifying. Near a post, beside the ravine, there was a kind of very large black bird. But what terrified me most was that instead of legs, it had hands. They were clearly hands. I was completely stunned, and the only thing I did at that moment was tell Elizabeth, "Run!" We ran as fast as we could until we reached my parents' house. From then on, we didn't want to talk about the subject anymore. I know perfectly well that many of you won't believe me, but I am convinced of what I saw, of what I felt. But as I told you at the beginning of this story, I thought all of that had been left behind, that it was a part of my past, that I had learned to let go. However, on October 31st, while I was heading to work, something changed. On public transport, in the middle of the crowd, I felt a gaze that pierced through me, a sensation that I hadn't experienced for years. My thoughts stopped when I saw those deeply familiar black eyes. However, I'm not sure if it was really her. Uncertainty filled me with doubts and memories I thought forgotten. And at that moment, I knew that the past doesn't always stay behind. I know I made a pact, and although I'm not sure of its veracity, the possibility that it's real fills me with terror. If it truly was, I currently have no intention of fulfilling it. I have decided that I'm going to run away. I have decided to get as far away as I can from this situation that consumes me. I will change my name and surname if necessary, as many times as I have to. But I have to escape from what I believe is coming. I am aware that despite my efforts, that dark shadow will probably find me. Unease takes hold of me, like a distant echo that never fades. I cannot allow myself to relive the horrors of my past. The idea of facing what I swore to leave behind simply paralyzes me, but I will do whatever is necessary to keep myself safe, even if that means living in constant anxiety. Fear always accompanies me, reminding me that there is no safe refuge. Thank you very much, community. Thank you for listening to me and for having patience with this story. I hope you believe me. I hope someone knows how to help me. Thank you very much, Uriel, for allowing us to share our experiences, even though not everyone believes them. Greetings and take care. Take care very much, please.